The crash left a thin white scar above my eyebrow and something else nobody could see. 3 days after the accident, the hospital sent me home. In the car, a truck horn blared behind us and my whole body flinched. Then, at the discharge desk, a nurse told me everything on my chart looked fine. A sharp metallic screech cut through my skull. She was lying about something. I told myself it was the concussion. I told myself a lot of things that week. Grant met us at the door before I even had my seatbelt off. He held me tight, the way he always did when people were watching. "Everything is under control," he said. "Trust me." The screech came again, worse, a grinding sound behind my eyes. He straightened his left cuff, the small habit that always came right before he lied. I said nothing. I walked past him into a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar. That first week set the pattern for the months after. At dinner with the Hendersons and the Pratts, Grant described carrying me up the stairs every night for a month straight. He said he barely slept, that he never left my side. The screech tore through my head like metal dragged across metal. It was Mara who had carried the tray up those stairs. Mara who sat with me through the worst nights, not him. Both couples told him he was a devoted husband. I ran my thumb over the crack in my carrying under the table and said nothing. A few days later, he took the bank mail out of my hands before I could open an envelope. He said the numbers would only confuse me right now, that he would handle everything so I would not have to worry. Lydia, visiting for the weekend, told me I was lucky to have a husband who protected me like that. The screech hit hard and sudden. I let him keep the envelopes. At his company dinner, in front of 40 coworkers, Grant raised his glass and joked that I could not even fill out an insurance form without him. The table laughed. Someone refilled his wine before he even asked. The screech ripped through my skull one more time, louder than before. I smiled along with everyone else. Under the table, I found the crack in my carrying again and pressed my thumb against it until it stung. Nobody at that table knew what I could hear now. A month later, when I mentioned wanting to see my old doctor about a lingering headache, Grant said he had already called and rescheduled it for me, since my regular schedule still needed careful management. I never asked him to make that call. The screech came fast and sharp. I thanked him anyway, the way I always did, and wrote the real appointment down myself on a slip of paper I kept in my coat pocket instead of the shared calendar on the kitchen wall. For years I had told myself Grant was simply confident, simply the kind of man who liked telling stories a little bigger than the truth. I had built 10 years of marriage on that excuse. Now every excuse came with a sound attached to it, and the sound never lied. Before the accident, I managed events for a design firm downtown. Sharp calendars, sharper opinions, my own income, my own schedule. Grant used to introduce me at parties by my job title. After the crash, that introduction quietly disappeared. He took over the driving completely, saying the doctors recommended it while my reflexes recovered. I never remembered any doctor saying that. He decided which errands I could handle and which ones were too much for me. I noticed how often too much for me matched things that would have let me see paperwork, statements, or people who might tell me something different than what he told me. One evening, he canceled a coffee meeting I had scheduled with an old coworker, telling her on my phone that I was still too fragile to see people. He handed the phone back and said he only wanted to protect my recovery. The screech came sharp and metallic. I had felt perfectly fine that morning. That night, I wrote her number down on my own, in a small notebook Grant never opened. By the time the corporate dinner happened, I understood something simple. Grant had not become controlling because of the accident. The accident had only given me a way to finally hear what had always been there. Grant was easy to like. He had an easy laugh, a firm handshake, the kind of charm that made rooms lean toward him. Coworkers called him generous. Neighbors called him thoughtful. I had believed both descriptions for a decade. The house we shared sat on a quiet street with a wide porch and a keyring by the door that had cracked the winter before the accident, back when I dropped it on the icy steps. Grant had offered to replace it a dozen times. I always said no. I liked keeping things a little broken sometimes, a habit he found strange and a little charming. Over the following weeks, the screech became familiar the way a smoke detector becomes familiar in an old apartment. It came during small lies about traffic and late meetings. It came during larger lies about money and time. I stopped flinching. I started listening. I never told Grant what I heard. I never told Helena, my neurologist, in plain terms either, not at first. Some things felt too strange to say out loud, even to a doctor paid to hear strange things. I began keeping a private list in my head, not on paper yet, just names and dates and the shape of each lie. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone would notice. Just quiet counting. By the time spring turned into early summer, my list had grown long enough that it stopped feeling like an accident and started feeling like evidence. Lydia visited often that spring. She had raised Grant alone after his father left, and she treated every compliment about her son like something owed to her personally. When she praised him for controlling the finances, she meant it as praise for herself too. I watched her touch the pearls at her throat whenever she talked about her son's success, a small habit I noticed without understanding yet how often I would see it again before the year was over. By early June, 6 months after the crash, I had stopped waiting for an explanation and started waiting for proof. I did not know yet that proof would arrive on an ordinary Tuesday morning, left behind on a screen he forgot to lock. That Tuesday morning, Grant left for work later than usual, rushing through the kitchen with his tie still loose. He grabbed his coffee, his keys, his badge, and forgot the tablet charging on the counter. I noticed it an hour later, buzzing quietly with a meeting reminder. I only meant to silence the notification. The screen was unlocked, still open from the corporate reboot that morning. A system update like that briefly skips the usual lock screen until the device sits idle again. An email sat open near the top of the inbox. It confirmed a large transfer into an account under a company name I recognized, tied to a woman's name I did not. Grant had told me once that this particular business was dead, wound down years ago, not worth mentioning again. The screech came the moment I remembered him saying it, sharp and metallic, even though he was not in the room to say it a second time. I did not confront him. I did not call Mara yet, or Owen, or anyone. I photographed the screen with my own phone, closed the tablet exactly as I had found it, and set it back on the charger at the same angle. 10 minutes later the screen locked itself again, the automatic timeout finally catching up to where it should have been that morning. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, not shaking, not crying, just turning the photograph over in my mind like a stone I had been waiting to find. For the first time, I had something the Screech could never give me on its own. Proof that would hold up outside my own head. 2 weeks after the tablet, I finally told Helena about the sound in plain terms, not the vague description I had given her before. Helena had been my neurologist since the week after the crash, patient in a way that made me trust her slowly instead of all at once. When I described the Screech clearly for the first time, she took off her glasses the way she always did before explaining something difficult. She said the brain could absolutely produce strange sensory responses after trauma, sounds tied to specific triggers, patterns that felt meaningful even when they weren't fully understood yet. She also said something I needed to hear more. She told me never to build a decision only on a feeling inside my own skull, no matter how convincing it felt. I told her I understood. I stopped waiting for the sound to warn me and started collecting things a courtroom would actually believe. I called Mara that same week, not as a friend asking for comfort, but as someone asking for an accountant's eyes. Mara had done my taxes for years before the accident and knew our finances almost as well as I once had. She came over with her laptop and a steel thermos she carried everywhere, tapping one fingernail against the lid whenever she found something that did not add up. That first afternoon, she tapped the lid 4 times in under an hour. We found a personal loan taken out against the house that I had never signed for, though a signature close to mine sat at the bottom of the form. We found a shell company registered the same month Grant told me the old business had closed. We found transfers moving in small, careful amounts, timed to stay under the limits that might trigger an automatic bank review. Mara tapped her thermos again and said the pattern went back at least 4 years, maybe longer if older records existed somewhere we had not found yet. I did not tell her about the Screech. I only told her I finally had a reason to look, and she never asked what that reason was. Owen came next, recommended by a coworker of Mara's who specialized in cases like this one. He met me in a small office with a wide desk, and before we even discussed my situation, he squared every paper in front of him into one perfectly even edge. He listened to what Mara had found without interrupting once. When I finished, he lined up the documents again and told me the evidence was strong enough to build a real legal strategy, not just a private grievance. He explained how to separate my finances quietly, how to protect what I could still claim as mine, and how to time every step so nothing alerted Grant before I was ready. He warned me the process would take patience. I told him I had spent 6 months learning patience I never knew I had. While Mara and Owen worked, I built a second life in small, careful pieces. I opened a new bank account online using only my personal email, the one Grant had never asked to see because he considered banking his job, not mine. I applied for 2 interview openings on days he worked late, using video calls scheduled while he sat in his own office 3 miles away. The second interview led to an offer from a company that wanted an operations lead with exactly my old experience. Before it became official, they asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement covering the negotiation itself. It was a formality, but it also meant nobody in Grant's circle would hear about it from anyone but me. I signed the contract electronically one afternoon while Grant sat in a budget meeting 2 floors above his own office, in a company he did not know I had ever contacted. The rest of that second life came together in small pieces I barely had time to notice building. Owen found an apartment through a property manager who only used a correspondence address, leased under my name alone. My new manager, a woman named Priya, handed me a project 3 times the size of anything Grant ever let me mention at his own dinners. I kept a second phone charged in the glove compartment of my car and a single lamp, then a kettle, slowly filled the empty apartment rooms. Grant never asked why my errands sometimes took longer than expected. He had trained me for years to expect no questions about where my time went, and now that training worked entirely in my favor instead of his. Through all of this, Grant noticed only the shape of a change, never the details underneath it. He noticed I stopped arguing with him. He noticed I stopped asking where money went, stopped asking why certain mail never reached me, stopped defending myself when he made small jokes at dinner about my memory since the accident. The lack of my usual reaction unsettled him more than any argument could have. He started checking his phone more often at the table. He asked strange, testing questions about my days, about whether I had seen anyone unusual, about whether Mara had been over lately. Once, when I asked casually whether the old company he mentioned last year was truly closed, he adjusted his left cuff before answering yes, of course, ages ago. The screech came instantly, familiar now, almost background noise against everything else I already knew. I said nothing, the way I always did now, and he seemed to find my silence more unsettling than any question I could have asked instead. Some nights I lay awake calculating how close I had come to missing all of it. If Grant had not forgotten his tablet that one Tuesday, I might still be waiting for a sound in my head to mean something instead of holding actual proof in a locked folder. Owen's investigation kept widening as the months went on. He found 2 more accounts opened under variations of my name that I had never authorized, each one funneling small amounts into the same shell company Mara had already flagged. He found a forged signature on a business loan application that matched mine closely enough to fool a bank teller, but not closely enough to fool someone who had actually watched me sign my name for a decade. When Owen showed me that signature next to my real one, he lined the 2 papers up edge to edge on his desk, adjusting them until they sat perfectly parallel. He said the discrepancy alone could support a fraud claim on its own, without anything else we had gathered. I asked him how long building a full case would take. He told me the timeline depended less on the evidence, which was already strong, and more on choosing the right moment to use it. Owen also walked me through what would happen to the house, the joint accounts, and the retirement funds once everything came out into the open. He said the paper trail Mara found would likely matter more to a judge than any emotional argument either of us could make, and that the safest path forward was silence until the case was airtight. I asked him what airtight meant in practical terms. He said it meant enough evidence that Grant could not talk his way around it in front of people who mattered, the kind of people who would never simply take his word the way I once had. Mara came by twice more that summer, and both times she brought the same steel thermos, tapping its lid every time a new document confirmed what we already suspected. She told me once, quietly, that she had known something felt wrong for years, but never had proof solid enough to say it out loud without sounding like she was simply jealous of Grant's success. I told her I understood completely. I had spent 10 years explaining away the exact same feeling in myself. Helena checked in with me twice during those months, mostly about my physical recovery, the headaches fading, the sensitivity to loud sounds finally easing. When I mentioned, carefully, that the strange sound in my head had started feeling less urgent lately, she took off her glasses again and told me that made sense. She said once a person stops needing a warning system, the warning often grows quiet on its own. I did not tell her the real reason the warning was fading. By then the apartment no longer felt borrowed at all. The cracked keyring stayed in my coat pocket during the day and on a hook by my own new door at night, a small object slowly collecting a second life of its own. Some evenings I still cooked dinner exactly the way I always had, setting his plate down first the way he expected, refilling his glass before he asked. Nobody watching us through the window would have guessed anything had changed. I had learned, slowly, that the safest version of leaving was the one that looked identical to staying, right up until the moment it no longer needed to. By late August, Grant's questions at dinner had turned sharper, more specific. He asked once, almost too casually, whether I had opened any new accounts recently, since he had noticed a small inquiry on our joint credit report. I told him I had looked into refinancing something small out of boredom, nothing serious. He adjusted his cuff and said that made sense, though nothing about his voice sounded like it made sense to him at all. The screech barely registered that time, a small metallic flicker instead of the sharp grinding sound from months before. I no longer needed it to tell me he was still lying. I already knew that on my own. In September, Grant came home unusually pleased, saying the board had scheduled a formal dinner to announce his promotion to senior vice president, with major partners and outside auditors attending as part of a routine annual review. He said the whole night would center on transparency and growth, the exact language his company used in every public statement that year. The screech rose sharp and sudden at the word transparency, the loudest it had been in weeks. I told him I looked forward to it. He smiled and adjusted his cuff, certain the biggest night of his career was still weeks away from any trouble. I called Owen the next morning. He confirmed the annual review already required outside auditors to receive full access to select corporate accounts before the meeting, a standard yearly process Grant's own company had used for years. It meant the documents Owen had gathered could reach the right hands through a channel that already existed, without me having to force anything unusual to happen. I asked him what that meant for timing. He told me the pieces were finally aligning on their own, and all that remained was choosing exactly when to hand over what we had. By the night before the dinner, Grant still believed the biggest risk to his promotion sat somewhere outside our marriage. He had no idea it sat across the table from him every single night. The dinner took place in a banquet room on the top floor of Grant's company building, glass walls looking out over the city at dusk. Round tables filled the space, each one set with the same white linen and the same small brass name cards Aaron had printed the week before. The board sat near the head table, along with Daniel from finance, Aaron from HR, several outside auditors invited for the annual review, and a handful of major partners flown in for the announcement. Lydia sat close to Grant, already glowing with pride before a single toast had been made. I sat 2 seats down from Grant, close enough to hear every word clearly, far enough that nobody would think to watch my face while he spoke. Owen sat near the back with the auditors, his laptop closed in front of him, waiting for exactly the right moment in the evening. Grant stood when it came time for his remarks, glass raised, tie perfectly straight. He thanked the board for their trust, thanked his team for their hard work, and said the thing that mattered most at their company had always been absolute transparency. The screech tore through my skull, the sharpest it had sounded in months. He adjusted his left cuff as he said it, the small habit I had watched 100 times by now. I asked quietly if I could add a few words before the toast continued. Grant hesitated only a second before gesturing toward me, confident enough in the room, and in me, to assume I only meant to say something sentimental about his career. Owen had already handed the auditors a complete set of documents earlier that evening, folded into the routine materials they expected to review as part of the annual process. Nobody in the room had reason to think anything unusual was happening yet. I asked the technician running the presentation screen to pull up a folder Owen had sent over that afternoon, listed under the same review materials already expected that night. The screen shifted from the company's growth chart to a set of bank statements instead. Daniel, sitting near the front with his ever-present pen, clicked it once out of habit before he even understood what he was looking at. Then he stopped clicking altogether, his eyes moving quickly down the numbers, the same numbers he had signed off on for years without noticing the smaller transfers hidden beneath them. More documents appeared. Corporate transfers routed through a company Grant had once called dead. A loan application carrying a signature close to mine, but not quite mine. Personal messages between Grant and a woman whose name matched the account from the tablet. Lydia's hand went to her pearls, touching them once, then again, faster each time, as if the motion alone could slow down what was happening across the table from her. The room reacted in pieces instead of all at once. One director closed the folder in front of him and looked directly at Grant without saying a word. The auditors leaned forward together, already flipping through the printed copies Owen had prepared for exactly this moment. Erin quietly closed her laptop and said the promotion vote would need to be postponed pending review. Two of the partners stood and stepped away from the table entirely, phones already in hand. I did not raise my voice. I did not call Grant a liar or a thief or anything else that would have made the moment about me instead of the facts already glowing on the screen behind him. I said only that every document on that screen came from real accounts, real signatures, and real dates, and that anyone in the room was welcome to verify each one against the company's own records that night. Grant said my name once, quietly, the way he used to say it when he wanted me to stop talking in front of other people. The cuff on his left sleeve stayed exactly where it was. There was nothing left to adjust it for. The company secretary, sitting near the door with a recording device for the official minutes, switched it off without being asked. The same automatic protocol used whenever a formal meeting shifted into an internal investigation instead of a normal presentation. Grant tried once more, his voice lower now, saying there had to be some explanation, that the numbers could be misread out of context. Daniel, still holding his pen without clicking it, said quietly that the account structures matched exactly what auditors flag every year for exactly this reason. He said it without looking at Grant, only at the screen. One of the partners, already standing, asked Erin whether the company had a standard process for situations like this one. Erin said yes, calmly, and that the process had already begun the moment the documents appeared on screen. Lydia did not speak. She kept touching her pearls, faster now, until Grant reached over and gently took her hand away from her own throat, the first time all night he had comforted someone else instead of asking to be comforted himself. I stood up before anyone asked me to explain further. I thanked the board for their time, said I had nothing else to add, and walked out of the banquet room while the auditors were still separating documents into neat piles across the head table. Nobody followed me to the elevator. For the first time in years, I did not need anyone to. I drove back to the apartment that night instead of the house, past the exit I had taken home for 10 years without thinking about it once. The city looked the same from the highway as it always had. Only I had changed the direction I was heading. 3 days after the dinner, Grant showed up at my new apartment, an address he should not have known yet but somehow found anyway, likely through Lydia or someone still loyal to him at the company. He stood in the hallway looking smaller than I remembered him looking in any of the years we spent married. His tie was loose again, the same way it had been the morning he forgot his tablet on the counter, though nothing about this morning felt rushed or careless. For the first time since I had known him, he did not try to explain himself first. He said only, "Trust me. We can fix this." The screech did not come. There was no gap left between what he said and what was true. It was not even a lie anymore. It was simply a man asking for something I no longer had any reason to give him. I reached into my pocket and felt the cracked keyring without thinking, the same habit I had carried through every dinner, every excuse, every quiet year before I finally understood what I was hearing. I told him I was not building my life on trust anymore. I told him I was building it on facts instead, the kind that did not need a sound in my head to prove themselves true. I closed the door before he could answer. The new lock clicked quietly into place, the same cracked keyring now holding keys to a home that belonged to no one but me. The crack that once felt like a small failure now felt like the only honest thing either of us had carried through that entire marriage. The loudest lie in the world loses all its power the moment nobody needs to prove it wrong anymore. Do you think Naomi was right to close that door for good, or did Grant deserve one more chance to make things right? Tell me in the comments below, and if this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more stories like this one.